The air was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that presses against the ears and makes even the smallest sound feel too loud. It was not a peaceful silence, but a tense one, filled with things unsaid and movements unseen. Somewhere in the darkness, something shifted. It might have been the wind, or perhaps an animal moving softly through the shadows, but to her it felt far more frightening. Her heart beat fast, each thump loud inside her chest, and fear rose like a wall she could not pass. It stood tall and cold in front of her, blocking every path forward. Yet deep inside her, beneath all the noise of her thoughts and the shaking of her hands, a small, gentle voice whispered, "You can do this." That voice belonged to Leela, even though for most of her life, she had barely listened to it. Leela was a quiet girl who lived in a small village surrounded by hills, fields, and forests. The village was simple and peaceful, with narrow paths, small houses made of stone and wood, and people who had known each other for generations. Most days passed in a familiar rhythm. The sun rose, farmers went to their fields, children helped their families or played together, and elders sat outside their homes sharing stories of the past. To many, it was a comforting place. To Leela, it was safe, but safety also came with limits. Leela loved stories more than anything else. She spent hours reading old books that smelled of dust and time, borrowed from neighbors or passed down through her family. In those pages, she found heroes who crossed oceans, climbed mountains, and faced terrible dangers. She read about brave girls and boys who stepped into the unknown, even when they were afraid. These stories filled her with wonder and excitement. When she read, she felt strong, as if she too could face great challenges. But when she closed the book and looked at her own life, fear returned. Darkness scared her. When the sun went down and shadows filled her room, her imagination ran wild. Every sound felt dangerous, every moving shadow seemed alive. Thunderstorms made her hide under blankets, her hands covering her ears as thunder roared across the sky. Even simple things, like talking to new people or speaking in front of others, made her nervous. Her voice would shake, her hands would sweat, and she would wish she could disappear. People in the village knew Leela as the quiet one. Some thought she was shy, others thought she was simply gentle. Few understood how much fear lived inside her, how often she wanted to be braver but did not know how. Despite her fears, Leela had a kind heart and a curious mind. She listened more than she spoke and noticed things others ignored, the way the light changed color at sunset, the sound of leaves whispering in the wind, the expressions on people's faces when they thought no one was watching. She felt deeply, even if she rarely showed it. One day, as summer reached its peak, the village announced something exciting. A festival would be held deep inside the forest. It was a tradition older than anyone could remember, a celebration of harvest, community, and togetherness. Lanterns would be hung from trees, music would fill the air, and families would gather to share food, laughter, and stories. For many villagers, it was the happiest day of the year. Everyone buzzed with excitement. Children ran through the village talking about games and sweets. Adults prepared food and decorations. Even the elders smiled more than usual, remembering festivals from their own childhoods. But the forest stood between the village and the festival grounds. The path through the forest was dark, narrow, and unfamiliar to many, especially the children. Tall trees blocked the sunlight, and the deeper one went, the quieter and stranger it felt. Stories had been told about the forest, some true, some exaggerated, about strange sounds, hidden paths, and things that moved in the dark. Many children felt scared. Some decided they would not go at all. Their parents comforted them, saying it was okay to stay home. Fear was normal, they said. Leela heard all of this with a heavy heart. She wanted to go to the festival more than anything. She imagined herself walking among the trees, feeling proud and strong. But fear wrapped around her thoughts like a tight rope, pulling her back. At night, she lay awake thinking about it. Her mind argued with itself. "It's too dark," one thought said. "You might get lost," said another. "What if something bad happens?" whispered a third. But then another thought appeared, quieter but steadier. "What if you don't go? What if you always stay behind?" As the festival day came closer, Leela felt torn between fear and desire. She watched other children prepare, their faces bright with excitement. She smiled for them, but inside she felt sad and frustrated with herself. On the morning of the festival, the village felt alive. People gathered in groups, laughing and talking as they prepared to walk toward the forest. Leela stood near her home holding a small lantern her mother had given her. It was simple, made of metal and glass, but it glowed warmly when lit. Her heart wanted to join the others. Her feet wanted to move forward, but her mind screamed, "Stay safe." She felt fear, strong and familiar, but also something else, a small spark of determination. She remembered the heroes from her stories. They had felt fear too. They had doubted themselves, but they had taken that first step anyway. Leela took a deep breath. Her hands shook as she tightened her grip on the lantern. She did not think about the whole forest or the entire path ahead. She thought only about one small step, and she took it. At first, it felt impossible. Her legs felt heavy, her chest tight, but she took another step and another. Soon she was standing at the edge of the forest. The trees rose high above her, their branches twisting together like giant arms. The path ahead was darker than she imagined. Twigs snapped under her feet and shadows danced across the ground. Every sound made her heart jump. Her fear grew with every step. She wanted to turn back, to run home and hide where it was safe and familiar. Tears filled her eyes. But then she remembered the stories she loved so much. She remembered the heroes who stood at the edge of danger, hearts pounding, hands shaking. They were not fearless. They were brave because they moved forward despite their fear. She lifted her lantern higher. Its soft light pushed back the darkness just enough to show the path ahead. "I can do this," she whispered. Her voice was quiet, but it was real. As she walked deeper into the forest, something unexpected happened. Alongside the fear, she began to notice beauty. Fireflies floated through the air like tiny stars. The sound of a river flowed gently nearby, calming and steady. Flowers bloomed along the path, their scent sweet and comforting. The forest was still dark and mysterious, but it was also alive. With every step, her fear remained, but it changed. It no longer controlled her completely. Courage began to grow, slow and steady, like a small flame protected from the wind. She stumbled once and nearly fell. Her heart raced, but she stood back up. She felt proud of herself, even for such a small thing. Time seemed to stretch as she walked. The forest felt endless, but she kept going. She focused on the light of her lantern, the sound of her footsteps, and the quiet voice inside her that kept saying, "You can do this." Finally, she saw it, a warm glow ahead, brighter than her lantern. Music floated through the trees, soft and joyful. Laughter echoed in the distance. She had reached the clearing. The festival was more beautiful than she imagined. Lanterns of every color hung from branches, lighting up smiling faces. Music played and children danced freely. The air smelled of delicious food, and happiness seemed to fill every corner of the clearing. Leela stood at the edge for a moment, taking it all in. Then she stepped forward. No one laughed at her. No one questioned her. Instead, they smiled and welcomed her. She felt a warmth inside her chest that had nothing to do with the lanterns. She had faced her fear, and she had won. As the night went on, Leela laughed, danced, and shared stories with others. She felt lighter, freer. For the first time, she truly felt part of something bigger than herself. When the festival ended and she walked back home, the forest did not feel as frightening. It was still dark, still full of shadows, but now she knew she could walk through it. From that day on, Leela understood something important. Courage does not mean having no fear. Courage means moving forward, even when fear is strong. She began to face other fears the same way, one small step at a time, speaking to new people, standing up for herself, trying new things. Fear was still there sometimes, but now she welcomed it as a reminder of her strength. It showed her where she could grow. As Leela grew older, her courage grew with her. She did not become loud or bold in the way some heroes did, but she became strong in her own quiet way. People around her felt inspired by her calm determination, even if they did not know why. She never forgot the forest, the lantern, and the small voice inside her. And whenever fear appeared, she smiled softly and whispered the words that changed her life. Years passed, but the lesson Leela learned that night stayed alive inside her, growing quietly as she did. Childhood slowly gave way to youth, and youth began to shape her into a young woman with thoughtful eyes and a steady heart. The village remained the same in many ways, the same winding paths, the same fields swaying under the sun, the same forest standing tall at its edge. But Leela was no longer the same girl who once stood trembling at its border. As she grew older, life presented her with new kinds of forests. Some were not made of trees and shadows, but of choices, responsibilities, and uncertainty. There were moments when she had to speak in front of others, moments when she had to decide her own path instead of following what felt safe, moments when the future seemed dark and unclear. Each time fear appeared, it felt familiar, like an old companion walking beside her. At first, fear still tried to stop her. Her heart would race, her thoughts would fill with doubt, and that old wall would rise again in front of her. But now she knew something she had not known before. Walls were not always solid. Sometimes they were only made of fear itself. She learned to pause in those moments. She would take a deep breath, just as she had done on the day of the festival. She would remember the lantern in her hand and the way its small light had been enough to guide her forward. She no longer expected herself to be fearless. Instead, she focused on taking one step, just one, and that was always enough to begin. The people in the village began to notice a change in Leela. She still spoke softly, still preferred listening over talking, but when she did speak, her words carried weight. When problems arose, she did not run away. She thought carefully, then acted with quiet confidence. Children who were afraid of the forest, the dark, or even their own doubts found comfort in her presence. Sometimes they asked her, "Aren't you scared?" Leela would smile gently and answer honestly, "Yes, sometimes I am." That surprised them. They expected bravery to mean fearlessness. But Leela showed them something different, that fear and courage could exist together, side by side. When younger children hesitated at the edge of the forest or grew afraid during storms, Leela would sit with them. She did not tell them to stop being afraid. She listened, just as she once wished someone had listened to her. Then she would tell them about a girl, a lantern, and a path through the trees. She never spoke as a hero. She spoke as someone who had been afraid and kept going anyway. Slowly, her story spread, not as a legend, but as a quiet truth. As time moved on, opportunities came knocking at Leela's door. There were chances to leave the village, to learn, to explore the wider world she had once only read about in books. Each opportunity came with excitement and fear. Leaving the familiar always did. On the night before she made her biggest journey yet, Leela stood once again at the edge of the forest. The moonlight filtered through the trees, and the path stretched before her. She felt the same tightness in her chest, the same flutter in her heart. But she also felt something else. She felt ready. Holding a lantern, just like she had years ago, she smiled to herself. The forest no longer seemed like an enemy. It was simply a reminder of how far she had come. "You can do this," she whispered. Not as a question, not as hope, but as a promise. And she stepped forward. Leela's life did not become perfect. She still stumbled. She still doubted herself. There were days when fear felt heavy again. But now she understood that courage was not a single moment. It was a practice, a choice made again and again, even on difficult days. She learned that bravery could be quiet, that strength did not always shout, that sometimes the greatest victories happened inside the heart, unseen by others. In time, Leela became someone others looked up to, not because she tried to inspire, but because she lived honestly. She showed that it was okay to be afraid, as long as you did not let fear decide your future. And whenever life grew dark, whenever silence felt heavy, whenever shadows seemed too close, Leela remembered the forest, the soft glow of the lantern, and the small voice that had guided her through it all. That voice never left her. It lived in every step she took, every challenge she faced, and every moment she chose courage over comfort. And it still whispered, steady and true. The journey Leela began after leaving the village opened her eyes to a world far larger than she had ever imagined. Roads stretched endlessly, towns buzzed with unfamiliar voices, and faces passed by that she would never see again. At first, the noise and movement overwhelmed her. The quiet girl from the small village felt lost among so many people, so many directions, so many expectations. Fear returned, stronger in new ways. There were days when she doubted herself deeply. She wondered if she had made a mistake by leaving the safety of her home. At night, loneliness crept in, heavier than the darkness she once feared. The comfort of familiar paths and known faces felt very far away. But each morning, Leela reminded herself why she had come. She wanted to grow. She wanted to learn. She wanted to become more than her fear. So she treated this new life the same way she had treated the forest, one step at a time. She learned to ask questions even when her voice trembled. She learned to make mistakes and forgive herself for them. She learned that being strong did not mean always knowing the answer, but being willing to keep searching. There were moments when she failed, moments when fear won and she stepped back instead of forward. Instead of blaming herself, she remembered something important. Courage was not about never falling, it was about standing up again. Slowly, confidence replaced doubt. Leela discovered talents she never knew she had. She learned to share ideas, to help others, to guide those who felt lost just as she once had. People began to trust her, not because she demanded respect, but because her calm presence made them feel safe. One evening, while walking through a new town, she saw a small group of children standing at the edge of a dark alley. They hesitated, whispering nervously, afraid to pass through it. The scene felt familiar, like a memory stepping into the present. Leela paused. She walked over and asked gently, "What's wrong?" "It's too dark," one child said. "What if something bad is there?" Leela smiled softly and reached into her bag. She pulled out a small lantern she carried with her, not because she needed it anymore, but because it reminded her of who she was. She lit it. The warm glow filled the alley, chasing away the shadows. "We don't have to run," she said calmly. "We just take one step, then another." The children watched her carefully as she walked forward. Slowly, they followed. Fear faded, replaced by laughter and relief. That night, Leela realized something new. Her courage no longer belonged only to her. It had become a light for others. As years passed, Leela's story continued to unfold, not as a tale of grand battles or loud victories, but as a life built on quiet strength. She became someone who helped others find their way through darkness, whether that darkness was fear, doubt, or uncertainty. She never forgot her village. She returned often, walking the familiar forest path with ease now. Each visit reminded her of where it all began: the frightened girl, the glowing lantern, the brave first step. Standing beneath the trees one last time, she looked up at the stars shining through the branches. Fear still existed somewhere inside her, but it no longer ruled her. It stood beside her, small and manageable, a reminder of how far she had come. Leela closed her eyes and breathed in the night air. Life would always have forests. There would always be shadows. There would always be moments of silence heavy with uncertainty. But she knew the truth now. No matter how dark the path became, she carried the light within her. And whenever fear tried to stop her, the voice inside her heart would rise once more, stronger than ever before. As time moved forward, Leela's life slowly settled into a rhythm shaped by courage and compassion. She chose a path that allowed her to help others, teaching, guiding, and listening to those who felt lost or afraid. She understood fear better than most, not as an enemy to be destroyed, but as a feeling to be understood and faced. People often asked her how she became so strong. They expected a secret, a single moment of magic that changed everything. Lila would smile and shake her head. There was no magic, no sudden transformation. Strength, she explained, was built quietly, step by step, choice by choice. She told them about fear, not to scare them, but to free them. She spoke of how fear never truly disappears, how it returns in different forms throughout life. But she also taught them that fear does not mean failure. It means you are standing at the edge of something important. In her heart, Lila still carried the image of that first walk through the forest. She remembered how small her lantern's light was compared to the darkness around her. Yet it had been enough. It had always been enough. That memory became her guide, reminding her that no one needs to see the whole path, only the next step. As she grew older, Lila became a quiet legend in the places she passed through. Not a hero sung about in songs, but a presence remembered with warmth. People remembered how she listened without judgment, how she encouraged without pressure, how she believed in them before they believed in themselves. And in quiet moments when she was alone, Lila reflected on the girl she once was, the child who hid from storms, who feared the dark, who stood trembling at the edge of the forest. Instead of shame, she felt gratitude. That fear had shaped her. That struggle had taught her how to be brave. In the end, Lila understood the truth that guided her entire life. Courage is not loud, and bravery is not perfect. Courage is choosing to move forward even when your hands shake. It is trusting the small voice inside you when everything else tells you to stop. Life would always bring new challenges, new forests, new shadows. But Lila no longer feared them, because she knew that no matter where she went, no matter how dark the path seemed, she carried her light within her, a steady flame built from every brave step she had ever taken. And as long as that light burned, she would always hear the words that began it all, calm and unbreakable, echoing in her heart. And so Lila's story reached its quiet, meaningful end, not with thunder or applause, but with peace. In her later years, she returned once more to the village where everything had begun. The houses looked smaller now, the paths narrower, yet they were filled with memories that shaped her life. Children played near the fields, laughing freely, just as she once watched others do. Some of them ran to her, eager to hear her stories, for they had heard of Lila, the woman who understood fear and taught courage without force. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Lila walked alone towards the forest. The same forest that once terrified her now stood calm and familiar. She followed the path slowly, feeling the ground beneath her feet, listening to the gentle sounds of nature. When she reached the clearing, she stopped. There were no lanterns this time, no music, no festival. Yet the place felt full. She closed her eyes and smiled. She did not need a lantern anymore. The light she once carried in her hand now lived inside her heart, steady and warm. Fear still existed somewhere within her, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt like a reminder, a quiet voice saying, "You are alive, and this moment matters." Lila realized her greatest journey had never been through forests, villages, or distant towns. It had been the journey within herself, from doubt to trust, from fear to courage, from silence to strength. She had lived bravely, not because she was fearless, but because she chose to keep going. As the evening breeze moved through the trees, Lila whispered the words one final time, not out of fear, but out of gratitude.